My name's Corey Hewlin. I'm co-founder and CTO of Mattermost.
Hey, I'm Emil Ivov, and I'm founder of the Jitsi project and current head of product at the Jitsi team at 8x8.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We just wanted to kind of talk about, open source, especially around things like collaboration, video and chat, and just have a sort of free-flowing conversation around that. So what do you think of your typical sort of Jitsi users? Like, why do people come and choose Jitsi?
So these are two questions, and I think it's important to distinguish them because the typical user is just like your typical human being, right? And it's the why that is interesting. I think it's not an exclusive tool, and this is very important I'll get into that in a second. The why is primarily two things. The first one is low friction. There's just no hassle around using Jitsi. You just go in, you jump into the meeting, and you're in, and you forget about the technology. And we're very big on that. The second one is this respect for privacy and security, which is on so many layers. It's the fact that we're open source. Obviously, that's an inherent requirement to just having a product that's respectful of security. It's not enough to just go out there and say, I'm open source, therefore, right? But it's pretty much a requirement because when people want to inspect what you're doing, it's hard enough to do it by looking at the code, but you shouldn't add hurdles to that. It should be very easy. Here's the code, check it out, see what we're doing. And then for a very long time, in a bunch of things, actually, if you, in whatever use case, like whether it's document editing, chat, you would know, or anything, people would go like, well, I want that, but I want it secure. And usually that implied sacrifice, right? It's like, well, okay, so we can give you the secure thing, but it'll be so complicated and annoying to use it. And that's where we've decided to make a difference as well, which I believe is what Mattermost is doing as well. You don't have to sacrifice any of the usability in order to use Jitsi. In fact, I think with Jitsi, and I would say to a large extent with Mattermost as well, you're actually getting better usability than you would with other competing products.
And that's what we say. You can have your cake and eat it too, right? You can have your security,
exactly.
You can have your sort of modern collaboration suite or whatever platform that you want. So yeah, totally. So what do you think of your typical sort of Jitsi users? Like, why do people come and choose Jitsi?
So these are two questions, and I think it's important to distinguish them because the typical user is just like your typical human being, right? And it's the why that is interesting. I think it's not an exclusive tool, and this is very important I'll get into that in a second. The why is primarily two things. The first one is low friction. There's just no hassle around using Jitsi. You just go in, you jump into the meeting, and you're in, and you forget about the technology. And we're very big on that. The second one is this respect for privacy and security, which is on so many layers. It's the fact that we're open source. Obviously, that's an inherent requirement to just having a product that's respectful of security. It's not enough to just go out there and say, I'm open source, therefore, right? But it's pretty much a requirement because when people want to inspect what you're doing, it's hard enough to do it by looking at the code, but you shouldn't add hurdles to that. It should be very easy. Here's the code, check it out, see what we're doing. And then for a very long time, in a bunch of things, actually, if you, in whatever use case, like whether it's document editing, chat, you would know, or anything, people would go like, well, I want that, but I want it secure. And usually that implied sacrifice, right? It's like, well, okay, so we can give you the secure thing, but it'll be so complicated and annoying to use it. And that's where we've decided to make a difference as well, which I believe is what Mattermost is doing as well. You don't have to sacrifice any of the usability in order to use Jitsi. In fact, I think with Jitsi, and I would say to a large extent with Mattermost as well, you're actually getting better usability than you would with other competing products.
And that's what we say. You can have your cake and eat it too, right? You can have your security,
exactly.
You can have your sort of modern collaboration suite or whatever platform that you want. So yeah, totally. How about in this day and age? I mean, I know we see a little, we see it as well, which is sort of this recent trend of, moving to remote first or remote friendly. Like, how has that affected Jitsi?
It was It's interesting, right? Because it wasn't that it happened that was surprising. It was how fast it happened. Because I'm sure you folks were in the same boat as well. You know that going toward remote work was a process that was never going to stop anyway. It was a train that was already on its way. And you can see that just because the model of urbanization that we've been on for the past century essentially is very much reaching its limits. And you see cities such as Paris and London and then the Silicon Valley, which are very differently urbanized areas. You have one that is a very strong center, one that is very distributed, and yet they all struggle with exactly the same thing. The cost of living is just horrible. Access to talent is very hard. Transportation is entirely saturated because you have these, either crisscrossing over large areas or this 3D centers that go into very large heights but still use a flat transport network. So it was very clear that remote work was going to happen. But I think we were all thinking, over the next 5 to 10 years, it'll probably switch to pretty much everyone on remote. And that was our optimistic assessment. And then all of a sudden it happened in 3 months. So I'll tell you that we had some, because in addition to the open source project, we also maintain a default service for everyone to use freely. We had quite a number of sleepless nights as we had to scale up 2 orders of magnitude to keep up. So it was quite a ride, but also it's what we trained for, right? That's where everyone would like to get and just feel useful. So that was quite gratifying.
I know it's really interesting. It's amazing to see the radical shift. Unfortunate circumstances bring it about, but I always like to say, we did remote work kind of before it was cool and it's hip and trendy, and now kind of everyone's moving that direction. They're doing it in a very blazing fast speed. So it's and the good thing is that you feel that it's going to end up better for everyone. I know that it doesn't feel like that right now. Believe me, just having to juggle 2 kids all day long and all that, I understand. But it will end up being better for everyone because the way that you get opportunities for work today, very often, there's this good job, but I have to relocate to the other side of the world. It feels like why would I have to make that trade-off? Or I'm this nascent startup, but gosh, I just can't afford the talent that's around here. So all of these barriers feel like would become much easier to go through for both sides, entrepreneurs and workers. How about some of the core use cases? Do you feel like they've stayed the same with Jitsi, or do you feel like they've shifted, especially recently, or are people still coming to you for the sort of same core use cases as they did before?
That's interesting. Many of them have stayed the same, but there was a massive adoption in a place where essentially there was zero adoption before, and that's the sector of education. And that's been very challenging because and it's something that many meetings platforms have seen. It's like up until now, I would say remote chat and meetings were used by consenting parties that are trying to get work done together. And then all of a sudden, you had this very interesting shift. Like schools are very reliant on real-time face-to-face communication. And we don't have to get into the whys and whether that's the right thing and whatnot. I have my opinions. It's just not the topic right now. The fact is that it happened. The problem is that a school class, especially for high schoolers, it's not really that you would define something that you would define as a conversation between consenting parties, because probably 80% of the kids there don't want to be there. And that showed, and with all these disruptions and booming and whatnot. So it was challenging to adapt around that. We had to add different controls and let people who were embedding us add their own controls, and it was challenging. But it's part of the game. Did you folks see anything similar?
No, we definitely did. Maybe not so much in the education space, although we saw a little bit of that, but just in terms of what you described as businesses really overnight needing to kind of move to, wanting to accelerate their collaboration platform, wanting to accelerate that in a way that was very secure, sort of focused. A lot of these older or larger businesses kind of moving off legacy applications. And what are they doing? Especially when you need that sort of collaboration tool to tie into their back-end systems, allowing that heightened security, however you want to describe it. So we definitely seen a really huge fundamental shift in the last couple of months of just that acceleration. Right. And it's been really interesting to see. And I think just people learning how, I think it's one of those things we take for granted, right? Like we've already learned how to remote work as a company. I think there's a lot of companies out there that just haven't, right? And so that's super fascinating to see.
It is. I agree.
Where do you think the future of Jitsi is, or where do you think the future of video conferencing is?
So
if you look into a crystal ball. What are you excited about?
There would be two things. Like the shorter term one is, I think we have come to understand that as a team, it is very important for us to actually start worrying significantly more about people like you who embed the Jitsi solution into their stuff. So we'll be working more on empowering developers like that to make sure that the API is richer and allows a bunch of use cases. So that's a very high priority for us, whether it's through just enriching the API, through actually offering the platforms and all of that. Then separately from that, I would say that in the future, there's this problem with meetings right now, that there's this blob of stuff that happened during a certain amount of time. And then it just like sits there as this object, and you kind of want to remember that, yeah, we agreed on that, and then we wrote this, but I'm not really sure. Let's just go and do extra work to document some of that. I'm hoping that we would learn how to avoid this. I'm hoping that as we go further with these things, the meetings platforms themselves would enable you to not have to do that extra work. That I call this flattening the meeting, that it would be, rather than this being this difficult to manipulate object, like have you ever watched a meeting recording? Probably never, right? Because it's such a colossal waste of time. I'd rather that instead we have the technology is arriving that would let us, extract important information with some user assistance, but not too much, because if you make people do too much work, then it becomes kind of useless. So I hope that this would become easier, and I hope that we would actually help with the meeting itself. We won't be just a simple replacement of the medium, replacing the physical meeting with the real one. With the video one. I hope that we would actually start facilitating the meeting, because if you go out there and you ask people what their main problem with meetings is, universally, the first thing you would hear back is there's too many of them, right? So I think that we'd be able to help with that in the future, and that's what I'm rooting for.
I think that'd be awesome, and I could totally see what you're describing as summarizing the meeting, and if that somehow got exported back into Mattermost, like that'd be amazing.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I had in mind. Yes,
our user base would love that idea. It's super exciting. I'm super excited. I know for me, same way. Like I'm super excited about what collaboration in the future holds, right? Whether it's chat collaboration or text collaboration, whether it's video collaboration, like it's just an interesting, day and age that we're living in, especially with the acceleration of these types of things. So it's fun to see all the innovation that's happening in this space.
I completely agree, and that's another good side of the whole acceleration of the remotification of work right now, because we were kind of all focusing around that. What would happen? Let's make it easier for when people are remote. Well, now that's done. Now we can focus on the innovation part and actually making it a lot better. And I would say actually that you folks are one step ahead in that, because I think chat platforms in general, and Mattermost in particular, have already started making work better, right? Not just remotely possible, but also better. And I think video platforms have to catch up in that regard. In fairness, I think it's harder, more difficult problems to be, because the information is less readily available. But I'm hoping that video platforms will catch up as well.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about the future. Awesome. How about open source journey? Like what has it been like? Has there been any surprises or things that have been inspiring for you along the way?
It's I would say it's actually in some ways it's one of the constants of my life, and maybe as personally as I've grown with open source, I've went through, initially it was just a way for me to just work on something that interested me without having to go through boring internships and things like that. It was just, I can get to do it right away, right now, and I might use it for my resume later. Later on became that it was a huge conviction that it just made the world a better place. And then obviously, pragmatic settle in, and you realize that you might have underestimated the need to have a sound business model as you were in your student years. So you have to go through that as well. And then, surprisingly, however, the advantages of open source remain from, we already mentioned the security perspective, which is fundamental, but also the ease with which the open source products lend themselves to collaborations with third parties, which is what's happening here right now, what's happening with many of our other partners. I think that's phenomenal. That's just, I've done some European projects in my life where a bunch of institutions would get together and define these consortiums, and just defining the agreement of the consortium is like half a year long process. And with open source projects, it's out there, it has the license very well defined. That's one of the advantages of the open source community, that it had the good sense to define, hey, you need a license, you need to define the terms up front. And then it's on a take it or leave it basis. Like, if you like it, join and contribute. And many people do. And it ends up in these unmeasurable, because again, you can't measure them in terms of lines of code, but still incredibly valuable contributions of corner case issues that are being uncovered very early, contributions that are very on point, very spotty, but you would have never thought of, and they're coming because someone was thinking of this slightly differently. So the ease of collaboration is fantastic, very fascinating, and I think one of the most important aspects of open source, other than security.
I know I feel that same way too. Like, I mean, it's you can talk about the security stuff with just eyeballs on the code, but I think you bring up the point for me that really drives it home is just that community, right? That community that's there, that's involved, that's helping in all these different ways. And it's just, I call it like, open source goodness, right? You're not even focusing in a certain area and something just, comes in from out of the blue. And it's amazing for me, it's very gratifying to just interact with those people on a personal level, to reach out and chat with them and just like, hey, what's going on in your life? Like, what, why Mattermost, or why Jitsi? Like, why did you come contribute? Like, what's going on? And it's just, to me, it's really fun to build that personal aspect of it.
It absolutely is.
Also for it to just be a force multiplier, right? A force multiplier for the product, the open source project, whatever it is. And it really drives that along. And that for me was something I was not ready for or accustomed to. Like, it was just like, wow, that's super powerful.
It absolutely is. And we haven't even mentioned the advantages that exist for developers as well, because it's one thing to go in a company and put in years of your life in, and then you have to leave because of another opportunity or something. And all of that's gone and behind you and locked away forever. And in the cases of open source, it's not. It's still out there. You can, at the very least, use it as a reference. You can use it as the basis for your next job and build upon it. And it's never lost. It continues to be yours, which is great.
That's what I love. And I talk about a story exactly like that, right? Where, you might have worked on something internally at a company and it's some internal thing, but because it's locked away in its internal company, you'll never describe it. You might have been like, built some internal build tool, like, yeah, yippee, right? Like, big deal. But if it's for an open source project, it's like, no, look at all this goodness I did. Let me show you the amazing, the amazingness that it is, and it lives over here and it lives on forever. Why do you think it's important? Or why do you think it's important for people to contribute to open source? What do they get out of it, and what does the open source project get out of it, or the company behind the open source project get out of it?
I think that's a fantastic question. I like how you asked it. Around the why, because many times in the past, I think people have been asking the question like, how do we make people write more open source? And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. You don't make people do anything that they don't need to do. So I like that you asked, why is it important for people? Why do people do it, right? And that's a great question, because people end up doing it. We talked a lot about how people are essentially scratching itches. Like there was this member of your community who needed a video integration, and they went and did it. Why did they contribute it out there? Why are they happy that this is now part of the Mattermost project? Because they don't have to worry about it anymore, right? They did it. They did the main work. That was their contribution. And now they've just let it out, and they can move on to their regular thing that they were doing. And that happens over and over when we contribute to other open source projects. It's the same thing. It's like, we're not particularly excited about maintaining forks of 100 things, right? We want to get something to solve our problem in a way that is as compatible as possible with the source community, and then just have them continue to run it to an extent that this is possible. So I think that's great. Then you have different categories, right? You also have people who, well, like myself, can do it to build their CV because they just went out of grad school or, just students, and they're interested and they can afford not to have a job immediately, for example, and they can spend a little bit of time just building up a resume on topics that are of interest to them. This is fantastic. This didn't exist before open source, right? Because it's like, well, if you want to work on something, let's say that, pre-Linux, let's say that you wanted to work on operating systems. Well, you have to go and find a job in an operating system company, and that can be very hard. So it becomes a catch-22 thing, because these companies will only hire people who have experience and all that sort of stuff. So that helps you break that catch-22 as well. And these are some of the reasons that we see. How about yourself?
No, I think you hit on we see three and you hit on two of those. One is people who just generally have a problem, like, Jitsi, Mattermost, I want integration, they just go do it. I think the second one you hit on is however you want to describe it, but education, right? There's either it's a technology or they want to build their resume in that place, and then they kind of go start from there and go contribute. The third that's really interesting to us, and I have this term for my column, partner customers, or however you want to describe it, right? Where it's customers or whatever who have very specific interests and want to push the product one direction, and they'll kind of contribute to the open source project as sort of partners. And sometimes it's really fascinating to see that, because we don't even realize it till like we're deep into the process of interacting with people that like, oh no, we're a customer over here. Like, we just really needed this. And so we see a need, fill a need kind of thing. Like, we just went and did it.
Yeah, that's great.
And for us, that was super interesting. How about the flip side? Like, have you noticed any benefits for your company? I know I can speak to ours. Ours obvious one is not only is a great community for contributions, it's a great source for us finding and attracting talent. And so I know for us, that's always interesting to go think about too.
Oh, absolutely. These are absolutely things that are of interest to us as well. But I would also say is, the people who can leave with their job and still use it, afterwards, these people would more readily come to work with us because they know that we're not taking their work hostage. And I would say that building, being able to tell your customers, our core is based on this open source project. If you have any concerns whatsoever, just go and have a look at it and let us know if anything's a problem for you. And we've had people do their own audits and come back and say, well, why are you doing this thing here on this line? And this trust model is very, very important. So I'm happy that to be working in an environment where we can be doing this.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah, exactly. I think it's super fascinating to see that.
So, speaking of all this, I was wondering. I thought I heard that it wasn't actually a Mattermost core team initiated effort to integrate Jitsi. Did that start with you folks, or was it something that the community started looking at?
No, that's a great question. So this is something that purely started with the community. So we have a great community contributor called his name is Sean Sakowitz. He's the one who created the plugin, and it was one of those things we saw it sort of being really interesting and aligned to sort of Mattermost the project, and we're like, okay, how can we as a product company or open source project come alongside and help pour energy and investment into that? It was already there and running very successfully, and we saw that. How did
you folks learn about it actually?
Yeah, no, so I think we just learned about it from our community itself. So we have a marketplace where people can go sign up and sort of share what they've worked on. And that's one of the main reasons. That's how we kind of discovered it through that process. Some of our community outreach people, I'm sure we're definitely talking with Sean. But I was kind of shocked because that's how I discovered it. Because we were starting to think of it from a perspective of like, we really need some deeper integration with video. Let's go see what's out there. Some really rich integration. Like, let's go see what's out there. And I ended up independently discovering Jitsi on my own, and then realizing like, wait a minute, we already got a pretty awesome plugin. Like, let's just add to that. Like, let's contribute to that effort. And that's really how it came about. So they're just another example of just the amazing power of community.
And what do you think makes it awesome? Why do you think this integration makes sense? What's important about it?
I think for me, especially when you talk about collaboration, like you need that sort of channel-based or topic-based collaboration, but you also need that sort of video, that ephemeral video, audio, however you want to say it, screen sharing, all of those things into one. I think one of the things that we realized when we started looking at this is we wanted that really rich integration. And hopefully we'll show you a little bit of a demo where I'll show that, where we really wanted to sort of take the goodness of Jitsi and what you guys are doing in terms of video conferencing and embed that into the Mattermost experience. And that, I think that was one of the things that we recognized right away that we could do, that ability to do that ability to create really rich integration between us, almost seamless integration. We have all these great ideas on where we think it can go, past that. But I think for us, that was like one of those key pieces is, here's two sort of independent open source projects. But them running together, makes this experience even more amazing.
Yeah, and you folks already had a number of existing meetings integrations. What do you think makes this one different?
Yeah, no, I think for me, I think it's the excitement about what we can do. I think specifically it's the embedded video. So we have a feature with Jitsi now where you click on the link to open up a video conference, and it's just right there embedded inside Mattermost. And I think for me, that's one of the keys. But I think when we start thinking about all the interesting stuff going forward, the ability to sort of richly populate back maybe conversations from the meeting back into Mattermost channel and stuff like that. And so I think that heavy integration or being able to kick off a channel and outing everyone to it into a video meeting at the same time. So there's all those things that in the future that we're excited about. But I think immediately today, it's just that one click integration where the video pops up right in line with Mattermost.
That does sound great. And do you think there's something to the fact that is it important, do you think, that both tools are open source? Do you think that matters to users? Do you think that having, open source collaboration alternatives is important to the people out there?
I think so. I know when we talk to our user and customer base, I think for them it revolves so much around that sort of openness and flexibility. I mean, there's no openness in terms of open source and owning the source code, and you get all those other benefits of security. But I think what people love is that sort of flexibility around it. However you want to describe it, like an extensible framework, something they can go contribute to, something that they can help direct with their effort. And I know for us, like especially when we talk about two, open source projects getting together, I think people really get excited about that because there's kind of two open source projects on either end. There's an integration in between, but then there's all the variability of what they can do with that flexibility. And that's one of the great things about open source, right? If an area of innovation isn't moving fast enough, like you can go contribute and you can help and push it along. And I think that for me is what's key or what's super interesting in terms of being able to drive your projects forward.
Yeah, I have this analogy. I wonder if you would agree with that. It's like in the commercial space, there's a bunch of certifications. In Europe, there's a lot of ISO stuff and GDPR compliant, and here there's the tons of them as well. And I'm wondering whether one could liken the open sourceness is just as one of those, because it's just as one of those ISOs is a guarantee for a certain level of security. Here you have this guarantee for never being locked in, never being limited. You can always go and add your stuff. And what would you say about that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's where it's really interesting, right? Like the ability for whether it's a business or a user to come along to add their own information to it, especially with things like getting certain certifications, especially things like in Europe. I know for me, it's always interesting as an American perspective. I love to see the European perspective. I always like to say that, they're so privacy focused and conscious, and data security is such a thing. And you can really see that between the two different areas. And you can, end users or end businesses can add to that over there. And that for me was what's really interesting, to sort of take that and extend it in certain ways that we don't necessarily see here. At least our business sees, I personally don't see, I guess is the best way to describe it. Demo, you want to see a quick demo?
I would love that.
So let me try. I'm going to be interested. Let me share my screen and we'll go through a quick demo of what it looks like. Can you see my screen?
I see it. Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is Mattermost. It's a channel-based chat application. So you get your channels down the left. You have your chat messages in the center. One of the really cool things that we did was integrate Jitsi video specifically. So for us, this happens as actually a plugin into our system. So there is no.
Actually, before you go into that, I have to say that every time I see the Mattermost interface and I feel so good about it because it's just so slick and professional and like looks to the point that I'm really glad, because people often have these expectations that maybe with the open source you get an extra dose of geekiness, of nerdiness that people don't bargain for, and there's none of that here. So I think you folks have done a very good job with the UX.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, it's something we as an organization are very conscious about, as a community, very conscious about. And we do try to invest a lot of time and yeah,
it shows.
So one of the really cool things about our plugin architecture is this platform where we can write these generic plugins that can take really in-depth integrations within the platform. And so what I'm going to show you here through Jitsi today is actually just written through our generic plugin interface. There's nothing specific or special to Jitsi other than the sort of extra integration work we went and done within the plugin itself.
Sounds great.
And that's what makes it really cool. So what we see up here on the top bar, we have this start Jitsi meeting. And when I click it, it just immediately shows a message into the channel saying like, hey, here's a Jitsi meeting. You can go join it. We're actually using your meet.jitsi for this. So when I join, it actually pops up right inside Mattermost. The Jitsi running right there. So I basically broadcasted in a channel saying like, hey, like I'm going to start this Jitsi meeting. And then right there within Mattermost itself, I just got the Jitsi plugin up and running. And for me, that it's such an interesting sort of scenario where I can maybe make this a little bigger, where it really helps see what's going on. You can see right there. You can move it around, which is kind of cool. You can actually make it bigger if you really wanted to. So I can just see, I can just see what's going on within Jitsi itself. You have all the Jitsi controls here, all the stuff that you guys kind of offer, which is really neat or interesting. And one of the cool things too is you can actually just tear this off. So that's what I just did right there. Was I actually said I don't want it in part of Mattermost anymore. I just want to tear it off onto a new tab within Chrome right here, and it just tears off in the new gram. So I can go back and I can still see my Jitsi my Mattermost stuff here. One of the scenarios we see this really coming in heavy is sort of DevOps integration tool set. We have a lot of our users around that sort of DevOps command center mentality. And we see them, having a lot of sort of war rooms and things like that. Where
that's perfect for those use cases. I can see that absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. They have a war room. They have an outage. They have all this sort of logs or information going through in the channel, and they can immediately right there from within the channel just sort of jump into Jitsi, drop down into a video call. And that's some of the really cool stuff. And they can immediately drop down into a video call, and they can immediately screen share.
Right.
Those are some of the really cool things.
This is looking great. And one of the cool things here is, for example, I noticed that as you launched it, it looks, there's the logo, which is the Jitsi logo, and the invite more people button, which kind of look busy. And the cool thing is that, this is happening because we haven't used it in such a small window before, but because now you need to use it in such a small window, well, you can go and submit a PR that kind of, scales this button appropriately, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And
yeah. And we're in the process of doing that, exactly that. So, in part of our exploration, we found where there's some things like, hey, it would work really good if we could do this. And exactly true. Like we're right in the process of doing that. Of like, so much better. And I think that exactly right. Like that's the power of open source projects collaborating together. Like to me,
right? That even if a thing wasn't built exactly for a certain use case, that it's fine. We'll work it out because it's out there.
Yeah, exactly. And so to me, it's just super cool. So anyway, that was our quick demo. Thoughts? Is there anything you liked? Anything that jumped out of you? Is like, oh, that's really cool.
Well, I would tell you that a bunch of people who integrate Jitsi are kind of satisfied to leave it at the point of where the link would appear in the chat room, and then they would click on it and it would go outside. The fact that you went through the trouble of building the built-in experience, the fact that you've worried about the details, like let's make sure that we don't have a bunch of thumbnails showing up there. That I really like, and the fact that in spite of that, you've also made it happen. As a there's the ability to split it out as a separate window. I really like that, and just as you, I'm so full of ideas that you folks can build on top of this, and we'll be here to help you with them. So I'm really excited about this integration.